Alright, so first let's set things straight. Midnight Mass is not a show about vampires. And I don't just say that to mean that this guy isn't a vampire, although he's definitely not, but we'll get to that later. What I really mean is that this isn't a show about vampires or demons or monsters at all. It's a show about human nature, it's a show about sickness, and at its core, it's a show about our ever-present need to mythologize and tell stories about that which is unknown. So, that said, what the hell happened in Midnight Mass? I'll start off by saying that this is one of the most human shows I've seen in a long time. In my opinion, there hasn't ever been a show that's captured the human condition like this show managed to do. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let's start off with the setting. Crockett Island, affectionately referred to as the Crockpot. When you're put on an island with only dozens of people, it really makes you contemplate the purpose of your existence. What's left of humanity when you start to strip away the veneer of human society? On top of that, the island is dying. Its main industry, fishing, was devastated by an oil spill, and those who remain are only hanging on by a thread. Not only are the people there disconnected from the mainland, the main link to normal human life as we know it, but they are also starting to become disconnected from the very place that they call home. The island is sick, and so are its people. There's a few members of the island that are sick in overt ways. There's Mildred, who is sick with dementia. Then there's Lisa, who became paralyzed from the waist down. She got that way because of a man who was sick with alcoholism, and that's a disease shared by our main character, who is also mentally sick with regret and sorrow after killing a girl while drunk driving. Then there's the more mundane examples, such as the mom, whose vision is going bad, and the dad, whose back is getting worse and worse. But there's not one person on the island who can escape the ultimate sickness: death. The island's local priest, Monsignor Pruitt, is a very elderly man who was on his last leg and close to death. But to celebrate his life and his ministry on the island, his parishioners sent him away on a trip to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. However, he doesn't return, and in his place, a young and charismatic priest comes who tells them that Monsignor Pruitt is sick but recovering on the mainland. We, of course, find out that this young man is in fact Pruitt himself, which leads us to the driving point of the show. By far, the most pervasive message and theme in the show is a relationship between the unknown and faith. Sometimes this mystery is due to our own ignorance, something we can't help. The main character gives a beautiful monologue, and yes, I know they overdo it with the monologues at times, but he gives his own theory about how religion came to be. He talks about the ancient humans hundreds of thousands of years ago sitting on mountaintops around their campfires, looking at other groups of humans hundreds of miles away on other mountaintops with their own campfires, telling stories about what those people must be like. Then he mentions those same humans looking up at the stars and, given their ignorance, coming to the conclusion that those bright specks of light must be more campfires with even more humans around them. But those people have to be different. They're so high up and so far away that those people must be far greater and far more powerful than themselves. Then they tell stories about how those humans even got to be there in the first place and what motivates them and what is at the core of their essence. So, religion, he says, came from those stories evolving and changing over tens of thousands of years. They took the mystery of the stars and filled in the gaps with what they knew to be true, both about the material and the immaterial reality. Faith was not forged out of lies, but out of an unintentional ignorance. The stories that arose from human pondering like that, then, are valuable not because they accurately reflected a material reality, but because they were a mirror into our own souls, our own values, and our own desires as early humans, things which seem to have a timeless and intrinsic aspect to them. Contrast that then with the mystery created and the faith forged by the story that Father Paul, aka Monsignor Pruitt, tells about Riley's rat. A young Riley, overrun by grief, brings a dead pet rat to the priest to get him to raise the rat back to life. After a few days, the boy checks on the rat and it's miraculously alive again. What Riley then realizes is that Pruitt actually switched the rat out with another one that looked just like it. And Pruitt rejoiced for what that event did for the faith of a young Riley in that moment, the sense of awe and wonder that it created. But all that Riley can see now is that whatever faith he may have experienced in that moment was not simply built on an inaccurate reality, born out of innocence or ignorance, but it was built on an intentional lie and explicit deception. And this is why I think that this show and its creator Mike Flanagan, a Catholic himself, isn't simply shitting on religion as a whole. In a scene with our Muslim sheriff and his son, we see an authentic faith that is deeply reverent, but that also accounts for reality, in this case the passing of his wife due to cancer, in a fair and consistent way. If God can intervene to heal some, why would he not heal all? We even see this in the devout Catholics, Aaron and Mildred, whose piety leads to self-reflection, not imposing a certain worldview onto others. This show does, however, have a lot to say about the way that religious leaders weaponize humanity's longing for an explanation of the unknown. So this is probably the part that you're most eager to hear about. What the hell happened in this show? How did they get young and healthy? What was up with drinking blood? Why did they burn in the sun? And if that thing wasn't a vampire, what the hell was it? So this next part is completely my own interpretation of the show, and of course, art can be interpreted countless ways. That said, if that thing actually was just a vampire, then I think this show sucks. But why? Well, after Riley disintegrates in front of Aaron, an image that will forever be burned into my brain, no pun intended, she shares that story with Crockett Island's local doctor, Sarah. Sarah then gives a monologue about the man who discovered germ theory. He made the staff in his hospital wash their hands and the death rate shot way down. But the wider medical world thought he was absolutely insane. It would be decades before his theory would be widely accepted, but in the meantime, this man who changed modern medicine was institutionalized and deemed crazy, all because he tried to account for reality in a way that challenged the traditional narrative. She then gave her theory on what she thought was happening on the island, specifically why her mom had made such an unexplainable recovery. She said that there seemed to be some sort of contagion that, 1, eradicated any foreign or harmful substance in the body, 2, was extremely sensitive to sunlight to the point of spontaneous combustion, and 3, created an extreme iron deficiency within the body, and thus an intense desire to consume iron-rich blood from other non-infected life forms. At first, the contagion only has mild effects. It only restores youthfulness and causes one's blood to burn in the sun, but not the entire body. There isn't a thirst for blood either, but once an infected person dies, they are then brought back to life with the full effects all in place. So what was the monster? Well, it doesn't ever really say, but my personal theory is that this is a human who was infected with the same contagion hundreds or maybe even thousands of years ago. And I think that if given enough time, everyone who had been infected with this contagion would have turned into something that looked like that. So with this in mind, let's recap the story. So Monsignor Pruitt travels to Jerusalem and gets lost in the desert, finding refuge from a storm in a cave. In that cave, he encounters that infected person that he mistakes for an angel, who then feasts on Pruitt's blood and then has him drink its own blood, thus restoring Pruitt's youth. Pruitt, being a Catholic priest, interprets this event as an act of God that he's been specifically chosen to not only partake in, but to share with his island community as well. And the message fits a little too well with what he teaches and what they already believe. I mean, they already feast on the blood of Christ that gives them everlasting life every Mass. They already believe in a God who raises the dead, and they've already been called to spread the gift of eternal life with the whole world. But this is still radical. Monsignor Pruitt knew they wouldn't be quite ready to hear this right out of the gate. So, just like with the Riley's rat, Monsignor Pruitt lies. He knew what their partaking of the angel's blood would do to them, and he leveraged not only their desire to believe in something, but specifically catered his message to leverage their own individual desires against them. For a girl bound to a wheelchair, God is providing mobility. For an old woman's decaying mind, God is providing mental clarity. And for a dying island, God is providing new life. An insane message is easier to swallow when it's accompanied by a man who is seemingly explaining things that can't otherwise be explained. The greatest irony is that these people weren't healed at all. They were made much sicker in a vastly different way. So, what do we take away from this show? Well, what I took away from it is that humans are extremely predictable. If there actually was some sort of contagion like this that existed out in the world, I can envision this type of scenario playing out perfectly. Growing up in a Pentecostal church background, I'd be even more intrigued to see how it'd play out in that context. To me, this isn't a supernatural show, which is why the monster being a vampire is such a shitty explanation to me, and it's not even a scary show, at least in the jump scare type of way. It's scary because it shows me both how vulnerable we are as humans and at the same time how quick some are to take advantage of our vulnerability. Humans are the only animals that tell stories. These stories, whether religious or not, have power. They can either provide us with deep insights into our essence that give us strength and wisdom, or they can strip away our agency by locating our weaknesses and preying on them. This show ends kind of cynically. Everyone dies except for 2 people, and we don't even know if they make it to safety. Maybe that means that no matter what story we tell or what circumstances we're put in, death will always be inevitable, even when, and maybe especially when, we're given deathlessness itself. Thanks for watching.